Okay, guys, again, I am going to roll two articles together in one video, and that would be the Levi Strauss in China article and the Sweatshops article following it. A lot of different discussion points here, and I'm going to leave most of it to you guys, but I do just want to give you a little kind of background information on the Levi article. The article that you have talks about Levi Strauss going back to China, so obviously they were there before and left, and a little bit about that initial incident. Some years before this article, Levi Strauss had gone to China and had contracted with a factory there to make their clothing. At that time, Levi Strauss had this policy that they did internal audits. I think it was each year, but it might have been every 2 years, but they did internal audits periodically on all the factories where their clothing was being made, whether they owned them or contracted with them, to make sure that the workers were in what they considered suitable conditions. When they did the audit of worker conditions on this factory in China, it failed. Now, mind you, several factories failed that year when they did the audits, and not all of them were in what kind of we would call depressed countries like China. There was one in Australia that failed, which we pretty much consider Australia to have the same kind of rights and freedoms as our country does. But back on point, um, the factory in China failed their internal audit. Some people got hold of that information and published it to the media, and it started a whole firestorm of, workers' rights advocates protesting and media printing, about Levi Strauss having sweatshops basically, and deplorable conditions for their workers, and on and on and on. The sort of flip side of that, the people of China, the workers in the factory in China, went to the management for Levi Strauss and asked that Levi Strauss not leave their factory, because when this firestorm of media attention and workers' rights protests came out, Levi Strauss basically went to the factory and said, either you're going to have to bring your conditions up to American standards, or we're going to have to pull out because of all the publicity and the negativity that's coming from this. The workers went to management and said, we don't want you to leave. In context of our country, our culture, the conditions in which we live and work, we have a good job. This factory is a good factory to work in, and by all accounts, compared to other factories in China, it was. Now, there's a huge difference culturally between the way people live in China and the way we live in America. There's a huge difference, obviously, in the workers' rights in China and workers' rights in America. Now, do we want to have the working conditions that they do? No, we don't. But, the question arises, is it right of us to go to this country, a country with different cultural, issues, a completely different context of how they live, and say, you have to live like us. You have to have factories like us. You have to have standards like us. And that was the question that arose, because the workers there said, we are supporting our families, our jobs are good, we're not being, tied down to the machines and beat or anything like that. Some of the issues that arose in the internal audit were things like, they have people working at a younger age than we do in our country. It's a cultural difference. They had different types of, I guess you might say, physical conditions. They don't have the lighting requirements. They don't have OSHA. They don't have the lighting requirements. They don't have the ventilation requirements. They had different bathrooms than we do. They didn't always have running water. Again, differences in the way they live and what they're used to and the way we live. So again, the question arises, do we have the right to go in and tell them that they have to live and work like we do? Or, as Levi Strauss did, which they don't really talk about in your article, but this is part of what allowed them to go back into some of these countries they had left. They went in and sort of modified their internal standards and said, when we do these audits of these factories, we're going to take into context the custom in their country. If the custom in their country is that, they work people at a younger age, as long as it's not working 6 and 7-year-olds, but, they work at a younger age because of cultural differences, and they're not being mistreated, then we're going to take that into consideration and not sort of impose our standards on their living. So that question arises. And it's the same thing with the following article with the sweatshop, slightly different, but some of the same questions. Are those really sweatshops, or is it a case where people work differently, people live differently in other countries? Also, we as consumers in America want cheap goods. So we as consumers demand that these companies keep the prices down. One of the ways they keep the prices down is to outsource their labor to cheaper labor areas. So, at what point is it the responsibility of us as a consumer to say, well, they're working these people in what we would call sweatshops. They're working these people in these third world countries, paying them 12 cents a day because that's what we want. We as consumers are demanding it. So at what point does the responsibility, why do we keep blaming the company when we as consumers are demanding that lower price of a product? So that might be something you want to think about. Is the sweatshop situation really what it seems to be? Is it something that is the company's fault, or is it something that is our fault as a consumer? And of course, always you have other issues I'm sure that you will talk about, but I just threw a few thoughts out there for you.